Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our class tonight. It's good to see everyone. It's good for us to be together, to study our Bibles and to grow together and to continue to consider the book of Exodus. Thank you again for being in this class, and hope you got your workbook. If you got your workbook, be on page 16. We want to finish up page 16. And then we're going to move on to the next lesson, which will be lesson number 5, okay? We have a lot to study tonight, so we're going to jump right into it. Before we do, I will ask Brother Charlie if he wouldn't mind, please, leading us in a word of prayer. Amen. Thank you, Charlie. Okay, so we're going to finish considering the plagues in the first part of our study tonight. And the things we want to mainly remember about that, since the time many of us were small children, we've studied the plagues, we've memorized the plagues, we've sang songs about the plagues, and all that is important. But the things we want to remember is, number one, these plagues were ultimately a judgment on the Egyptians. This was God's way of bringing judgment on the Egyptians for the worshiping false gods, for their rejection of him. It was also a judgment against their gods, little g gods. Remember, they worshiped false gods, and through these plagues, God was exposing their gods, that they were, in fact, no gods at all. So this was a judgment against the Egyptians. This was a judgment against their gods. And it also ultimately was a judgment against Pharaoh. It was a judgment against his pride and his hard heart. Through these plagues, God ultimately would destroy him, would bring him down because of his hard heart. And Matt led us in a study of that on Sunday night. So let's just finish up these final questions here on page 16. We stopped really at about question 12. Remember, in question 11, we wanted some examples where God's foreknowledge is clearly made evident in the story of what took place with the plagues and really with the Exodus as a whole. We talked about the example of Pharaoh as how God knew how he was going to respond to the plagues. We talked about how another example of this was the death of the firstborn. God knew that after the destroyer went out, that would force Pharaoh. Pharaoh will finally give in and let the children of Israel go. And then another example, or a couple other examples, one was one Carl mentioned about how God knew that the children of Israel would eventually come back to Sinai. That's where God first appeared to Moses, and the children of Israel would come there. And then another example was when they got to the Red Sea, God knew that Pharaoh would think they were lost and have a change of heart and go after the children of Israel again. So the important point from that is God's foreknowledge is all through this story. Throughout this story, we clearly see God knows what is going to take place before everything takes place. He's got foreknowledge. And then question 12, we talked about why did Moses keep rejecting Pharaoh's compromise proposals. Remember, there were a couple of times when Pharaoh was trying to compromise. One time he would say, okay, you children of Israel, you can go out and worship, because remember the first request was, can the children of Israel, can we be allowed just to go out and do a 3-day journey in the wilderness? And Pharaoh rejected that, but then as the plagues came, he would try to compromise. He would say one time, you can go out, but don't go too far. And then he would say, you can go out, but you can't take the women and the children, because he knew the men would have to come back if their wives and children didn't go. And then another time he would say, well, you can take the women and the children, but you can't take the animals. So all these times, he's trying to come up with these compromises, and Moses rejects them because it was not God's intent that the children of Israel just go out with just the men, or just go out with the men, women, and children and leave the animals. It was God's intent that all the Israelites go out, their animals go with them, and they get spoils of war without even battling. And they go out not just for a 3-day journey, but ultimately they go out for good. So God doesn't have to compromise with this man. It's going to be God's way. Pharaoh is going to do things the Lord's way, and he's going to have just to accept that. So there needs to be no compromise. Also, question 13, as we wrap this up, why do you think Pharaoh was so stubborn and unrepentant? Why was this man so stubborn? Pride. Yeah, that's it, Don. Pride. Does the Bible warn us about pride over and over again? Do we find warnings throughout the Proverbs? Do we find Jesus talking about pride? And let me ask y'all this. Can pride destroy us today? Can pride be something that brings us down today? You better believe it can. And we got to be careful. I have to be careful. We all have to be careful. You know, pride is not one of those sins we really talk about a lot as Christians. You know, we talk about adultery, we talk about homosexuality, we talk about, lust and lying and stealing and teaching false doctrine. I mean, all those things are wrong. Those are sins. But pride may be a bigger problem for us than we want to admit a lot of times. And probably it's pride that causes us not to admit it. But pride, a lot of times, is at the core of a lot of our problems. We got to be careful of it. Brother Dunn.
I don't think we have a true understanding of what pride is. Now, I can feel exceptionally good about accomplishments
Sure.
in my life.
Sure.
But I've got to give glory to God because He put that in me.
Yes. Yes, and ultimately the way pride can hurt us is if really when we don't want to submit our will to God's will. That's really what it boils down to. And that was Pharaoh's problem. He didn't want to submit his will to God's will. Even in these compromises, it's not wanting to submit to God fully. And pride can hit us in so many different directions. You know, if I go to the Bible and I see something and I just don't want to do that because my parents didn't do that, my parents didn't teach me to do that, that's pride in my way. Or if somebody in the church makes me mad, they don't shake my hand, they're ugly to me, and I say, well, I'm going to leave the church, or I'm going to leave Jesus because this person made me mad. You know what that is at the core? At the core, what is it? It's pride. See, a lot of times pride is at the core. It's more than just shaking your fist at heaven and saying, God, I'm not going to do what you say. It can be in subtle ways too. And if we stop and think about it, a lot of our problems can really go back to it if you really understand what it is and what it involves. So we got to be careful of it. Got to be careful of pride, because pride is what brought Pharaoh down, and it'll bring us down as well. So remember, Jesus says God exalts the humble. He brings down those who have pride. So Pharaoh had a problem with pride. Okay, last question here. Then we'll move on. Can we develop hearts like Pharaoh? Not just the pride part, but some of the other things we've seen. When you think about Pharaoh's heart here as a whole, the hardened heart, can we develop that today, and if so, how? Now, I have a couple of examples I want to use, but I want to hear from you first. What are some ways in which, well, first off, can we be like Pharaoh when it comes to how we see him behaving throughout this account, and how? How can that be? So anybody got anything? Brother Joey, then Harvey after that. Go ahead, Joey. Right.
Everything like that, we've got all this good stuff, and yet we don't thank God for everything that we have because we did.
Right. So when we think about the prosperity we enjoy, Joey's talking about when it comes to our prosperity, you know, we don't give God the credit for that, and we take the credit ourselves. Yeah. That's being like Pharaoh. What we did, don't want to acknowledge God. Absolutely. Harvey, you had something, sir. Humanism, right. Right. Nothing's more superior to man. And we find humanism, Brother Harvey's mentioning humanism, it's all over the place. It's we're getting immersed in it in our culture. And that's exactly what Pharaoh was what he had. That's absolutely true. Anybody else? Maybe one more example. Brother Doug, yes, sir. Yes.
Lord, to remember history. I mean, that was Pharaoh. Pharaoh starts off with, who is the Lord?
Who is God? Yes.
They didn't know, they didn't remember what Joseph had done for them and God had done for them.
Yes.
And then when it's brought up to it, it's like, well, who is that? He doesn't do any research.
Exactly. Doesn't try to learn, consider the, and he's not honest with the evidence. When the evidence is there, he's not honest with it. And that's something else. I'm telling you, Doug, that's something else we got to be careful of. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. You know, it's one thing to not know who God is, but when you start to learn about God and the evidence is thrown out there to you about who Jesus is, and he was raised from the dead, and the eyewitnesses, and you don't even honestly consider that stuff. That's like Pharaoh. So absolutely. Brother Matt, yes, sir.
I think, too, when we don't consider the evidence about God's will for us.
Yes, yes.
Come into a conversation with somebody believing that you're saved by praying the sinner's prayer.
Right.
And they show you 1 Peter 3:21, baptism now saves you.
Yeah.
And you still say, no, I don't accept that baptism saves me.
And, man, how many studies have I had like that? Where Matt is talking about, you know, not just learning about who God is, but learning about God's will, and you see the evidence for what God's will clearly is, one example being baptism, and you reject that. And the Bible's clear on that. A verse like, baptism now saves you, and you still reject that. That's being like Pharaoh. You're rejecting the evidence that is clearly laid out for you. You've hardened your heart against the Lord. I want to show y'all one more thing if I could, because everything you guys are saying so far is right on point. I amen all of it. It's all great. I want to just show you one more thing here, because I was thinking about this one. Look at Exodus chapter 8. I want to read verses 25 through 32, and I want to show you something here. Here, this is after the plague of the insects, these biting insects, whether they were beetles or whatever, gnats. And whatever they were pretty bad. Well, listen to what happened after these swarms went out. Exodus chapter 8, verse 25, Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God within the land. Remember I told you, he said you can go, but just basically don't go too far. But Moses said, it is not right to do so, for we will sacrifice to the Lord our God what is an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice what is an abomination to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not then stone us? We must go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he commanded us. Pharaoh said, I will let you go that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only you shall not go very far away. Make supplication for me. So what is Pharaoh saying? Make supplication for me. That's another way of saying what? Pray for me. Pray for me, please. Don't pray. He wants the Israelites to pray for him. Does it look like he's like, this is God at work here, and please make God stop? Do y'all see that? All right, now let's keep going. Verse 29, then Moses says, behold, I'm going out from you, and I shall make supplication to the Lord that the swarms of the flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only do not let Pharaoh deal deceitfully again, and not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses went out from Pharaoh and made supplication to the Lord. The Lord did as Moses asked, and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants and from his people. Not one remained, but Pharaoh what? Hardened his heart this time also, and he didn't let the people go. Now I want you to think about that. I want to show you one more. Look at chapter 10 in verse 16. This is in the case of the locust. Remember, the locust came in from the east wind. Well, they came in, and then God eventually blew them into the Red Sea. But they came in, and when they came in, they ate whatever the hell didn't destroy. And this one impacted Pharaoh also. So look at verse 16 of Exodus 10. Then Pharaoh hurriedly called for Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned. Look at that. He says, I've sinned. Looks like some repentance there, right? I've sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now, therefore, please forgive my sin. Only this once, and make supplication, there it is again, to the Lord your God, that he only remove this death from me. He went out from Pharaoh and made supplication to the Lord, talking about Moses. So the Lord shifted the wind to a very strong west wind, which took up the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Now one locust was left in the territory of Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, like Matt was talking about Sunday, and he did not what? He didn't let him go. What do you see there? Do you see it? the bad stuff starts happening to him. And he says, God, make it stop. He says, pray for me. Tell your God to make it stop, and I'll let him go then. And then once he gets his way, once the good days come, what does he do? He goes back to the sin. That's what he does. Joey, you had your hand up, sir. That's exactly right. That's what I'm saying. Joey was saying, and that's the point I'm making, how, and I can't tell you how many times I've been guilty of this. I'll stand before everybody and say I've been guilty of this. You're going through a rough time, and you're not living right. You say, God, I'll do better if you make this go away. And then the sunny days come. And what do? We go right back to the bad things we were doing before. We break our promise because the good days are here. But when the bad days come, we call on God. We want God to help us. We want God to save us. Then when God shows mercy and helps us, then we go back to our bad habits. That's what Pharaoh did. When he was at his low point, he's like, please, God, make it stop. Pray for me. I've sinned. I'm wrong. And then when he gets his way, he's like, changed my mind. Not letting you go. That's how he was. And can we be guilty of that? Absolutely. Dr. Clifford, yes, sir.
I agree with all of this, but still have a hard time deciding where God hardened his heart and Pharaoh hardened his heart.
Yeah.
I mean, God said, I'm going to harden his heart.
Right.
At one time, and he did. And so how much of it's God and how much is Pharaoh?
Well, I think it starts off as Pharaoh, then it turns into God. I think it starts out as Pharaoh, then it transitions into the Lord doing it. Yep, he did. And if you know, and no, that's exactly right. And that to me shows back the foreknowledge of God, Dr. Clifford. God knows the whole time, unfortunately, this man's going to be stubborn. This man, huh? Well, I will say this, Dr. Clifford. I think, I'm not going to take his free moral agency out. I don't think any of us would, because that's what, obviously that's what the Calvinist likes to do, take your free moral agency out. But I will say that God knows the nature of this man. God knows everything about this man. And, the more God does things, the more this man, and this is the Lord at work here, God knows what's going to push his buttons. Just like I know what pushes my wife's buttons. I know exactly tonight I can harden my wife's heart. I can do it easily. I told Debbie how I could. I ain't going to tell y'all. But there's one thing I can do that'll do it. And I know how to do that. And if I know how to do that, I think God knows how to do that. I think we can agree on that. And God does do that, ultimately in an effort to destroy this man. That's what God does. Yes, sir, Brother Tim, then Billy. Yep. Yes, that's exactly right.
I don't think there's any doubt that God and Jesus knew he was going to do it.
Yep.
And Jesus told him to go, whatever you're going to
Go do it. Go do it. Yep.
Eventually he would have remorse for it and threw the money back.
Right.
All through that process, he could have chosen not to do that.
Right.
I think at any point in time, Pharaoh could have.
Oh, I think he absolutely could have. He could have repented at any time, but God knew he was never going to. There is the foreknowledge of God. He knew he never was going to.
And then in the case of Esther, Mordecai told her, who knows if you weren't
Putting this
put here by God.
for this time. Yeah.
If you don't do it, there'll be deliverance from somewhere else.
Right. God's going to do what he wants to do regardless. Doesn't matter who's reigning, who's in control, who he allows to be raised up, or who he even raises up himself. God's will be accomplished. I think that's the main thing we don't need to miss. Absolutely. Brother Billy, yes, sir. Go right ahead, sir. Right. He doesn't tempt us. That's right. Right. No, I think, yeah. Right. I think, again, this goes back to just God knowing what kind of man Pharaoh was and God intentionally pushing this man's buttons. intentionally pushing his buttons to make him look bad and ultimately to destroy him. Brother Matt, yes, sir.
I don't think that God tempts us, but God certainly does put us in situations where we have to make choices.
We got to make choices.
And if you put an honest, good-hearted man in Pharaoh's situation, then probably after plague number 1, the guy starts crying out, "The Lord, He is God."
Yes.
And go out, Israelites. I can't fight against God.
Right.
And we see people doing that.
Well, I think about Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar, y'all know there were times when Nebuchadnezzar, he had a hard heart against God, and God put him in situations, and he responded differently than Pharaoh. When the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the fiery furnace, and remember when he was on the top of his palace one night, and he said, "Look at all I've done. By my power, by my strength." God had him eating like an animal afterwards. And then afterwards, what did he acknowledge? God rules what? In the kingdoms of men. So Nebuchadnezzar seemed to be a man who, when he was at that point of making a choice, he was willing to humble himself and at least acknowledge God. Pharaoh never wanted to do that. He never did. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Matt. You have something to say. Go ahead.
Same thing is true for us, too.
Right.
That if we go through a hard time in our lives, then God is using that to make us make a choice.
Right.
And the choice that we make reveals a great deal about what our heart is.
Right. Absolutely. Good point. Good point, everybody. Brother Doug, yes, sir, and then we'll move on.
I think you look at the scriptures in total, and you see God, punishing nations and saying sometimes, their iniquity's not full yet.
Right.
But it's coming.
Right.
I'm going to punish them. And he knows what's going to happen. But then you look and he sends Jonah
Right.
to a nation.
And he knows they're going to repent. Yeah. Yeah.
If Jonah goes, they're going to repent.
Yeah.
He knows what's going to happen.
He does. He does.
They make a choice.
Yes. Yes.
But God, God's looking at the whole picture, and consistently through Scripture, He sees what nations are doing, He sees what the intent is, He knows where that's going to end up.
Right.
And I see Egypt being another one of those nations. He saw where that was going.
Right.
He knew where it was going to end up.
Right. And he saw what kind of man Pharaoh was. And he knew how that was going to end up too. Absolutely. Brother, did somebody else have their hand up? Billy, yes. Oh, Brother Felton, I'm sorry, sir. Go right ahead, sir. You're talking about the heart? We're talking about choices or? All pride? I don't think all pride is bad. Either, like Don was saying earlier, I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud that you may have a great family, you may have done good in your life. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the problem comes in when we're not willing to acknowledge God. And in the context of this study, I think it's definitely bad when we're not willing to submit ourselves and humble ourselves to the will of God. And that's really what I'm talking about tonight is when I'm not willing to humble myself to the will of God, that's a form of pride, and that's always wrong. But there's nothing wrong with being, proud because I'm a proud papa. I'm a proud daddy. We use that language. I don't think there's anything sinful about that. Yeah. Yes, sir. Brother Billy. Yes, sir. The devil maybe do it. Yeah. Right. Now, at the end of the day, and I think we all agree on this, we're free moral agents. We make choices. And God knows ahead of time the choice we're going to make, but there are times when he will put us in positions where that's going to be manifested. Brother Lee, yes, sir. And then Carl. Yes, sir. Well, yes, just once, yes. Yeah, just once, yeah. Forgive me this once. That's a great point. That struck me too. Lee was talking about, you even see the problem, he's repenting, quote unquote, when he says, forgive me this one time. Yeah, that struck me. That doesn't sound right, does it, Lee? Brother Carl, then we'll move on. Yes, sir. Right. Yeah. Right. 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 Yes. And God knew that. Let me tell you something, Carl. And I was talking with my wife about this the other night, because we had a big conversation about this whole thing. And one of the things I said is God knew where to hit this man the hardest. God knew that if I really want to hit this man and push his buttons, just mess with his ego. Just mess with his ego. That's the thing that will push his buttons, make him look bad in front of the other Egyptians. Make him have to humble himself and let these servants go, these people he cannot stand. God knew that if I really want to get this man and get under his skin, mess with his ego. And to us, our same, point may be ego also. It could be something else. But we all got something that can make us, or that can, and God, all those places, if you look at it, the last 5 especially, they're messing with his ego. And God knew that would push his buttons. Brother Dr. Clifford, yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
So we're still in the age of miracles. And he opened Lydia's heart and he closed Pharaoh's heart.
I'm sorry, Dr. Clifford, I missed the part about the miracles. What was you saying? Explain that part to me, if you don't mind, sir, about the miracles.
That which is perfect is come, and that which is in part will be done away. The age of miracles, and when the last person died who had their hands laid on, the age of miracles passed.
Right.
Pharaoh
Right.
was doing the time of miracles.
Oh, I got you. I'm sorry. Right.
God was still operating in a miraculous way with people on earth.
So would you say God took away his free moral agency? Oh, I don't know, Dr. Clifford. I agree with. I don't know if I agree with that one, Dr. Clifford.
He says he did. He said, I hardened his heart.
Well.
But there's several times, or at least one time, you used the word humble.
Right. Right.
Moses told him, said, when are you going to humble yourself
Yeah.
before the Lord?
Right.
My people go.
Right. Right.
So he had opportunity after opportunity to humble himself.
Yeah.
You think any man would humble himself, but no, God was operating on his heart.
I just, we probably won't get.
Operating on Lydia's heart to open it so that she don't.
Well, the way I take that passage is, I kind of take it to go in the opposite direction of what I believe about Pharaoh. But my opinion on this, and my studying on this, my thinking is that Pharaoh was just a stubborn man. And my understanding of Pharaoh, the Lord hardening his heart, was the Lord knew how to push this man's buttons, and that's what he was doing. But I'm just not willing to say that God takes away anybody's free moral agency, because that's the thing that makes us superior, or one of the things that makes us superior to really anything else God made as our free moral agency. And I have a hard time just accepting that. That's just me. But everybody may disagree with me on that, though. But I just have a hard time. I have a hard time with that. Anybody else have anything, though?
It's a stumbling, saying that God took away his free moral agency is a stumbling block
Yeah.
to a lot of people.
Well, I don't think God wants anybody to be lost. I don't think God wanted Pharaoh to be lost. But if a man's not going to submit himself to God, then God will expose him and bring him down. And I think in my study of it, I think that's what happened ultimately. Yes. Right. Right. I think God is always just. I don't think there's any time when God is not just and God doesn't give people a chance. And I think Pharaoh was just a stubborn man, and probably the most stubborn man in the Bible, in my judgment. Brother Don, yes, sir. Sure, God raised him up. Yep. Yep. Right. Yeah.
He's sitting here with that attitude and says, "You're gonna be what?"
Yeah. You know, I'll just say this. If y'all want to know more about that, man, I thought we was going to have this settled when you preached the lesson. You should be standing right here right now, but not me. Yeah. But anyway, if you got any more questions about that, I would just recommend going and listen to Matt's lesson again, because I thought he did a good job covering, just in my opinion. So that's all I really have to say about it. I'm not going to say anything really any different than what he did. So let's move on to the next part, lesson number 5. Let's go to lesson 5. I want to go to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus 12. And let's read the first 28 verses. I know that's a lot there, but I think we need to read this. And we're not going to be able to cover this whole lesson tonight, but I do want to at least hit the highlights of it. Wayne, I'd ask Wayne, would you mind helping me, sir? And could you please read the first 13 verses, if you didn't mind, sir? Brother Doug, could you, Arnie, could you please read 14 through 22? And there was somebody else I had in mind I was going. Oh, Jeff, would you mind, sir, reading 23 through 28? Yes, sir. So we kind of just all go together with it. But Wayne's going to read 1 through 13, Doug 14 through 22, and then Jeff 23 through 28. We're in Exodus 12. Brother Wayne, whenever you're ready, sir.
Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the person. According to each man's need, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, the male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. Then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire. With unleavened bread and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw, nor boil it all with water, but roast it in fire, its head with its legs and its entrails. You shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. And thus you shall eat it, with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt.
So this day shall be to you a memorial. You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting order. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread
Thank you. Thank you to all you brothers who read. Thank you. Let's go through this. Before, we're not going to really get to go through the questions. Before we do that, we'll go through that next time. I kind of just want to hit what's going on just here, and then we'll go back and quickly go through those questions. Because I think what I'm about to go through here with you will help address a lot of those questions in your book, okay? So y'all walk through this with me. Let's just walk through this and see what we find here. The beginning of this, in the context here, this is right before what? What is God doing here right before what event? What's the event coming? The 10th plague. That's key. So we're kind of going back in time. We've already went through the plagues, but now we're going to go back and get on a time marker right before the 10th plague. That's important. The 10th plague, which is the firstborn, which, and I went back and looked at this, Debbie, some translations of what you were looking at, firstborn, or how it was in the original. Don, I think you alluded to this. It was typically masculine. So it could have been, that could have meant firstborn sons. It's possible. That's what that means. When you go back and look at the original Hebrew and how that word firstborn is typically treated in a masculine way. So I can kind of see why the NIV would do that. I went back and studied that. I'm not saying I'm 100% on that, but that's probably why they put it that way, because of the masculinity of the word firstborn. Yes, sir, Don. Yeah. Right. But I think some translations, like the NIV's, taking that masculine to mean boy. So, but again, regardless, it's a firstborn child, maybe a son, regardless of a child. Okay, so the beginning here, you have the beginning of the Jewish calendar. Do you see it? God right here in this month that they're in is saying, I'm going to start your calendar. In the Jewish calendar, this month was called Abib. And God's going to do some things in this first month. So the Jews are going to start their calendar now. And the time they're in, this will be the first month of the year for them. This will be equivalent to our April. We just got done with April. Well, that's the beginning. Last month would be the beginning of the Jewish calendar. Okay, so what did God want done on the 10th day of the first month? He wanted them to select a what? A lamb. Take a lamb, and I want you to put it up for 4 days. Okay? How many lambs were there to be per family? 1. What if you got a small family and one lamb too much for you? What do? You go to your neighbor and you join with them, right? So if you got a big family, with 3 or 4 kids, one lamb, hey, but if you got like a little small family, maybe no children, maybe 1 child, and 1 lamb is too much for you, you go join yourself with another family. So on the 10th day of their first month, they were to select a lamb. They're going to put it up for 4 days. You have 1 lamb per household. If 1 lamb is too much for your household, you join yourself to another household. Okay, let's describe the lamb. When we read this, what did you notice about this lamb? This lamb had to be what? Without blemish. That's important, especially when we get to how it relates to us. But it's got to be without blemish, spotless. What else? 1 year old. You see how God's being specific here? God is specific, no vague generalities. Lamb without blemish, 1 year old, and it could either be a lamb or a goat. That's right, a kid of the goats. Yes, got to be male. That's right. It's got to be a male. That's good. When was the lamb to be killed? You get the lamb, the 1 year lamb or goat, it's male. When do you kill it? Yeah, on the 14th day at sunset. Right. So the 14th day, that's 4 days later. Okay? Now, when you kill the lamb, the blood is important, right? What were they to do with the blood of the lamb? Right. You take the blood and you put it on the doorpost, right? And you also put it on the lintel, which that would have been the door casing that is over the door. Joe, you know all about that. Yeah, the top of the door. That's right. So you got the top of the door, then you got the doorpost. So God is saying you got to do. Now, why do they have to do that? Because that would do what? That's a sign to the destroyer going to pass over them. So I don't want to get ahead of it, but there you go. It's going to pass over them when that's there. This is important. And it's also important to understand that, and somebody made this point a few classes ago, you know, with the other plagues and God's protecting them, they didn't have to do anything. Now, if they want God to spare them from what's going to happen to the Egyptians, they have to what? They got to do something. And they got to do it exactly the way God said. From when they kill this thing, from when they pick it out, to when they kill it, to what they do with the blood, where they put the blood, how they eat it. I mean, God's specific on a lot of different things here. This is important. It's important to God. Okay, so they put on the doorposts, on the lintel. And let me also say this about that point, that as far as these instructions go, it really wasn't supposed to be every Israelite's home. It was supposed to be the homes in which the lamb was eaten in. That's important. So where the meal is going to be, the house has to be marked, if I can say it that way also, with the blood of the lamb. Okay, so let's talk about how the people were to eat the lamb. So we got the house marked with the lamb's blood, have the instructions of how to kill the lamb, but let's talk about how the people were to eat it and cook it and all that stuff for the cooks in the room, which would not be me. So how were they to do these things? Cook it and eat it. Roast it over a fire with herbs, and they were with bitter herbs. And that bitter part's important there. Bitter herbs, and got to eat with unleavened bread. That's important too, because don't we see the idea of unleavened and unleavened symbolic really and throughout the Bible, particularly when you get to 1 Corinthians 5, if you haven't studied that yet. That's important there too. Okay, how were they to eat the lamb? The lamb was not to be eaten raw or boiled. Can't eat it raw, you can't eat it boiled. And you can't just take the lamb and eat half of it or cut it in half or cut it into 4 parts. How are they to cook the thing? It had to be cooked as a whole lamb. But the whole lamb, and then you cook the whole thing. And let's say you're eating the meal. You're eating the meal. How are you to look when you're eating it? How are you to be dressed? You got to have all your clothes on. Because in this context, they have to be ready to go. They got to have the staff in their hand, sandals on, ready to go. Because once that destroyer goes out, God knows Pharaoh is going to let his people go. And let's say, as far as they continue to do this throughout their history, because we know this would be the beginning of a memorial, right? They would do this all the way up through their Old Testament history. What would you do if you couldn't eat the whole lamb? Like, man, I'm full now. You burn it. No leftovers, right? God says you don't eat, you don't leave any leftovers. You burn whatever you don't eat. So when y'all see these instructions, as we get ready to wrap this up tonight, what strikes you about what God is doing here? What strikes you about God here and these instructions? Very precise, isn't it? That struck me too. God is very specific. God is very precise. And when it came to how they would do this meal moving forward in their future, it was important how they did it. And when it came to them being spared when the destroyer went through, it was important they did exactly what God said. Yes. If you're poor, you don't have a big family, he's taking care of them too. That's right. And it's interesting how God said when the destroyer went through Egypt, among the Israelites wasn't going to be any problems. Not even a dog was going to bark. Y'all catch that? I mean, it was going to be very peaceful, very different than what's going to happen with the Egyptians, huh? So I think this is a good stopping point. We're about to hit the bell. What I want to do next time is we're going to just kind of zip through those questions on page 19 because we really kind of went through it, but I kind of want to zip through those real fast. I really want to hit the application on questions 11 through 13 on page 20. So we'll do that next time if the Lord wills, okay? Thank y'all tonight. Great discussion. I really appreciate y'all's comments. Thank you.